They destroyed every human ship except one. That single warship made the galaxy beg for peace. Part 1. The stars over Kepler Station were quiet that morning, the way they always were before something terrible happened. Captain Sarah Cade stood on the bridge of the UES Reckoning, a heavy cruiser of the United Earth Fleet, and watched the calm blue light of the nearby gas giant reflect off the viewport. She did not know yet that in 6 hours, everything she loved would be gone. The Reckoning was part of the Kepler Defense Line, a chain of 41 human warships spread across 3 star systems. It was the largest fleet Earth had ever built, gathered here because scouts had reported strange movement near the edge of Coalition space. Nobody in the fleet believed it would come to war. Humanity had signed trade agreements with a dozen alien species over the last 30 years. There had been small disputes, some tense negotiations, but nothing that pointed to open conflict. That belief was about to be proven very wrong. At 0600 hours, sensors on the flagship Valiant picked up a strange reading. Thousands of small objects were appearing at the edge of the system, moving too fast and too precisely to be debris or asteroids. Admiral Chen, commander of the Kepler line, ordered all ships to battle stations. Sarah felt the alarm through the deck of her own ship before she heard it, a deep vibration that ran up through her boots. "Report," she said, walking quickly to the command chair. Lieutenant Commander Tom Reyes, her executive officer, was already at the tactical station. His face was pale under the red emergency lighting. "Captain, we're reading over 3,000 contacts. They're organizing into attack formation. It's the Vandrake Coalition." The Vandrake Coalition was an alliance of 7 alien species that controlled a large region of the galaxy bordering human space. They were old, powerful, and until this moment, mostly peaceful toward humanity. Nobody understood why they would attack now, without warning, without a declaration of war, without even a single transmission demanding surrender. Sarah did not have time to wonder why. She only had time to fight. "All hands, battle stations," she said over the ship-wide comm. "This is not a drill." The first wave of coalition ships hit the outer picket line within minutes. These were small human patrol vessels, fast but lightly armed, meant only to watch and report. They never stood a chance. Sarah watched on the tactical display as 6 blue dots, representing human ships, blinked out one after another. No escape pods. No survivors reported. Just gone, as if they had never existed. "My God," Reyes whispered. "They're not trying to disable them. They're trying to erase them." The main coalition fleet arrived 20 minutes later, and it was larger than anything Earth had ever built. Sarah counted warships in classes she did not recognize, some shaped like curved blades, others like massive spinning wheels bristling with weapon ports. Admiral Chen ordered the Kepler line into a defensive formation, hoping to hold the choke point at the edge of the system, long enough for reinforcements to arrive from Earth. But reinforcements were 4 days away, and the battle would be over in 4 hours. The Reckoning took its position on the left flank, alongside 2 destroyers, the Hammer and the Constant. Sarah gripped the armrests of her chair as the first volley of enemy fire lit up the black of space. It looked almost beautiful from a distance, streaks of violet energy crossing the void, but she knew each one of those streaks could tear a hole through steel and flesh in an instant. "Shields at 90%, called out Ensign Park from the defense station. "Multiple impacts across the port side." "Return fire," Sarah ordered. "Target their lead ship, full spread." The Reckoning's rail cannons fired, sending a wave of kinetic projectiles across the gap between the fleets. Sarah watched one of the strange blade-shaped enemy ships take a direct hit and spin off course, trailing debris. It was a small victory, but it did not last. Within seconds, 3 more enemy ships took its place. The battle became a blur of fire and death. Sarah watched the Hammer take a critical hit to its reactor core and disappear in a flash of white light. She watched the Constant try to retreat, only to be caught by a swarm of smaller enemy fighters that tore through its hull like paper. All around her, on every channel, she heard the voices of other captains calling for help that would never come. Admiral Chen's flagship, the Valiant, fought for nearly an hour before it too was overwhelmed, taking 4 coalition cruisers down with it in a final, desperate ramming maneuver. Sarah had never seen anything like it. The coalition ships did not seem to care about their own losses. They kept coming in endless waves, as if losing ships meant nothing to them. as if the only thing that mattered was making sure every human vessel in the system was destroyed. "Captain," Reyes said, his voice tight, "we're the last ship still broadcasting a combat signal. Everyone else is gone." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. 40 ships. Over 12,000 crew members. Friends she had trained with at the academy. People she had eaten breakfast with just that morning on the station. All gone in less than 3 hours. "Options," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "We can't win a straight fight," said Chief Engineer Mei Lin, who had come up to the bridge when the engine room lost primary power. "Our shields are down to 40% and dropping. If we stay here, we die with the rest of them." "There's a nebula cloud 2 light minutes from our position," said the navigator, Ensign Ose. "The Kestrel cloud. It's thick with ionized gas. It might mask our engine signature." Sarah looked at the tactical display one more time. The Reckoning was surrounded on 3 sides by enemy ships, but there was a narrow gap opening on the 4th side, as the Coalition fleet moved to finish off the remaining wreckage of the human fleet. It was not a plan. It was barely even a chance, but it was the only one she had. "Helm, best speed to the Kestrel cloud," she ordered. "Reyes, reroute all non-essential power to engines and shields. May, I need everything you've got to keep this ship in one piece for the next 10 minutes. The Reckoning turned hard, and burned its engines at maximum output. Sarah felt the ship groan around her as it pushed past safe operating limits. Enemy fire chased them across the void, and twice the ship shuddered from near misses. A support strut on Deck 6 collapsed, injuring 3 crew members. Sarah heard the damage reports coming in one after another, but she kept her eyes fixed forward, on the dark smudge of the nebula growing larger on the view screen. "They're breaking off pursuit," Reyes said suddenly, disbelief in his voice. "Captain, the closest enemy ships are turning away." "Why would they let us go?" Sarah asked. "I don't think they're letting us go," said Mei Lin quietly. "I think they don't see us as a threat anymore. One ship. To them, we're already dead. They're just moving on to finish the job elsewhere." That thought hit Sarah harder than any weapon fire could have. The Coalition fleet was not chasing them because, in their eyes, a single crippled human cruiser did not matter. They believed the war was already won. They believed humanity's ability to fight back had ended today, in this system, with the destruction of the Kepler line. The Reckoning slipped into the Kestrel cloud, its engines cutting to minimum power as it drifted deep into the ionized gas. On the bridge, nobody spoke for a long time. The only sound was the soft hum of the life support systems and the occasional beep of a damage control alert. Sarah sat in her chair and stared at the tactical display, now empty except for the fading dot representing her own ship. 40 ships gone. An admiral dead. Thousands of crew members, people who had trusted their leaders and their government to keep them safe, wiped out in a single morning. And somewhere out there, the Coalition fleet was continuing on, likely toward Earth itself, believing there was nothing left to stop them. "Captain," Reyes said quietly, breaking the silence. "What do we do now?" Sarah looked around the bridge at the faces of her crew. Mei Lin, covered in soot from the engine room. Ensign Park, still shaking from the intensity of the battle. Ensign Ose, staring at his console with hollow eyes. Reyes, waiting for orders, waiting for something to hold on to. She thought about Admiral Chen's final transmission, cut off mid-sentence, as the Valiant took its last hit. She thought about the 6 patrol ships destroyed in the opening minutes, gone before they even had a chance to fight back. She thought about every name that would be read out in the coming days, families across Earth learning that their sons and daughters were never coming home. And she thought about the Coalition's mistake. They believed one ship did not matter. They believed the fight was over. "We're not running back to Earth to warn them and hide," Sarah said finally. "Not yet. If they think we're finished, then we use that. We stay quiet. We repair what we can here in the cloud, and then we figure out exactly why they attacked us, and we make them pay for every ship they destroyed today." "Captain, it's just us," Reyes said. "One ship against an entire Coalition fleet. What can we possibly do?" Sarah stood up from her chair and walked to the viewport, looking out at the swirling colors of the nebula that had saved their lives. Somewhere beyond that cloud, the Coalition fleet was moving deeper into human space, confident that nothing stood in their way anymore. "They made one mistake today," she said. "They let one ship survive. We're going to make sure they regret that for the rest of their existence. Behind her, the crew of the Reckoning began to move, checking damage reports, restarting systems, preparing for whatever came next. Nobody knew yet what that would look like, or how one battered cruiser could possibly change the outcome of a war that had already claimed an entire fleet. But for the first time since the attack began, there was something other than fear on the bridge. There was purpose. Deep in the Kestrel cloud, hidden from the enemy that believed it had already won, the last warship of the Kepler line began to heal its wounds. It would take days before the Reckoning was ready to move again, and weeks before Sarah Cade fully understood the true scale of what the Coalition had planned. But the seed of something had already been planted that morning, something the Coalition could not have predicted and would come to regret. They had destroyed every human ship except one, and that single ship was not going to run. It was going to fight. Far away, near the edge of the Kepler system, the Coalition fleet regrouped and set a new course, deeper into the territory of a species they believed they had already crushed. They did not know that somewhere behind them, in a cloud of drifting gas, a wounded ship and its determined crew were about to become the beginning of their greatest nightmare. The war had only just begun, and humanity's answer to it was still hiding in the dark, waiting for its moment. 3 days passed inside the Kestrel cloud, and every one of them felt like a year to the crew of the UES Reckoning. The ionized gas that hid them from Coalition sensors also made repairs difficult, since the same particles that blocked scans also interfered with fine engineering work. Chief Engineer Mei Lin barely slept during those 3 days. She moved between the engine room and the shield generators with a tablet in hand, snapping orders at her repair teams, patching holes in the hull with whatever material could be spared. Captain Sarah Cade spent most of her time in the small briefing room just off the bridge, going through data logs from the battle. She wanted to understand what had happened, not just how the Coalition had attacked, but why. Humanity had no history of conflict with the Vandrake Coalition beyond minor trade disputes. There was no declaration of war, no list of grievances. Nothing that explained why 7 allied alien species would suddenly commit their combined military might to erasing an entire human battle fleet. "I found something," said Lieutenant Elena Cross, the ship's intelligence officer, stepping into the briefing room on the morning of the 4th day. She was young, only 26, but she had a sharp mind for pattern recognition that had already proven useful twice during the crisis. Before the attack began, our sensors picked up a burst transmission on a frequency we don't normally monitor. It was encrypted, but I managed to isolate part of the signal. She placed a data slate on the table. Sarah leaned forward to look at it. "It's a Coalition military designation," Elena continued. Roughly translated, it reads as Directive 7, Containment Protocol. I cross-referenced it with old diplomatic records from our first contact with the Coalition, 20 years ago. There's a term buried in an old survey report. The Coalition calls humanity the accelerating species. "Accelerating how?" asked Reyes, who had joined them along with Mei Lin. "Population growth, technological development, colonization speed," Elena said. "In the 20 years since first contact, humanity has expanded into 11 new star systems. We've gone from basic fusion drives to the jump engines this ship uses. Every species in the Coalition took hundreds of years to make that kind of progress. We did it in 2 decades. Sarah felt a chill run through her. "They attacked us because we're growing too fast." "I think so, Captain. I think the Coalition Council decided humanity was going to eventually challenge their control of this region of the galaxy, and instead of waiting for that to happen, they decided to remove the threat now, while they still had overwhelming military advantage." The room was quiet for a moment. Mei Lin was the first to speak. "So this was never about a fair fight. They didn't come to negotiate, or even conquer us. They came to make sure we never became a problem in the first place." "That fits with what we saw at Kepler," Sarah said, thinking back to the battle. "They didn't try to capture ships or take prisoners. They erased everything. No survivors reported from any of the picket ships." She paused, feeling the weight of that realization settle over her. This wasn't a war. It was an extermination attempt. Reyes clenched his jaw. "Then what happens now?" "They think it worked. They think the Kepler line was the last significant human military force." "It might as well have been," Mei Lin said quietly. "Kepler was almost half of Earth's total battle fleet. What's left back home is mostly older ships, defense platforms, training vessels. If the coalition pushes toward Earth with the force we saw 3 days ago, there won't be much standing in their way. Sarah stood up and walked to the small viewport in the briefing room, looking out at the swirling gas of the nebula. She thought about her orders, about the chain of command, about what a responsible officer would do in this situation. The proper move was to head back toward Earth immediately, to warn Fleet Command about the scale of the attack and the coalition's true intentions. But something about that plan did not sit right with her. "If we run home now, what do we actually accomplish?" she asked, mostly to herself. "We tell Earth what happened. Fleet Command scrambles to prepare a defense with what little they have left, and the coalition fleet, which outnumbers us by a factor of 100, arrives at Earth before we've had any real chance to prepare. We'd be handing them exactly what they want, just a little later than they expected." "What's the alternative?" Reyes asked. Sarah turned back to face her officers. "The coalition believes the Kepler line was our main strength. They believe there's nothing left in this sector capable of resisting them. That means they're not expecting an attack from behind. They're not expecting anyone to be hunting them. You want to fight a war of one ship against an entire coalition fleet," Reyes said, not quite believing what he was hearing. "I want to use the one advantage we have left," Sarah said. "They think we're gone. As long as they believe that, we can move through their territory, gather intelligence, hit their supply lines, and slow their advance toward Earth. Every day we buy is a day Fleet Command has to build up whatever defense they can." Elena spoke up. "Captain, I picked up something else in that intercepted transmission. There's a supply convoy scheduled to pass through the Halvorn corridor in 6 days, moving fuel and munitions to resupply the main coalition fleet. If that convoy doesn't arrive, it could delay their advance by weeks while they arrange alternate logistics." Sarah felt something like hope stir in her chest for the first time since the battle. "How confident are you in that intelligence?" "Fairly confident. The transmission included coordinates and a timestamp. If it's accurate, we have a chance to hit them where they don't expect it." Sarah looked around the room at her officers. Mei-Lin, exhausted but steady. Reyes, cautious but loyal. Elena, sharp and eager to prove her intelligence work mattered. She thought about the crew beyond this room. Over 300 people who had survived the destruction of an entire fleet, and were now looking to her for direction. "Get me an estimate on repair timeline," she said to Mei-Lin. "I need this ship combat ready within 5 days." "That's tight, Captain, but I think we can do it if I pull crew from non-essential departments to help with the repairs." "Do it," Sarah said. "Reyes, I want a full tactical plan for hitting that convoy. We can't go toe-to-toe with a defended fleet, so we need to think differently. Hit and run. In and out, before they know what happened." "Understood, Captain." Over the following days, the crew of the Reckoning worked without rest. Mei-Lin's repair teams patched the hull, restored full power to the shield generators, and even managed to improve the ship's stealth systems using scavenged material from a damaged sensor array. Reyes and his tactical team studied every scrap of data available about coalition supply convoys, building a plan that relied on speed and surprise rather than brute force. Elena continued monitoring intercepted coalition communications, building a clearer picture of their military structure and the location of their forward staging points. Sarah spent time walking through the ship, visiting different departments, talking to crew members who had lost friends and colleagues in the battle. She found Ensign Park in the observation lounge on the 5th day, staring out at the nebula with a haunted look on her face. "You doing okay?" Sarah asked, sitting down across from her. "I keep thinking about the hammer," Park said quietly. "My roommate from the academy was stationed there, Petty Officer Diaz. We used to study together for exams." She wiped her eyes. "I don't even know if there's anything left to bury." Sarah did not have an easy answer for that kind of grief. She had lost people too, friends from her own years at the academy, officers she had served alongside on previous postings. "I can't tell you it gets easier right away," she said, "but I can tell you that what we do next matters. Every day we survive and fight back is a day we make sure people like Diaz didn't die for nothing." Park nodded slowly, wiping her face and sitting up a little straighter. "I want to help however I can, Captain." "Then get some rest," Sarah said. "I'm going to need you sharp in a few days." On the morning of the 6th day, the Reckoning emerged from the Kestrel cloud, its hull patched and its systems restored to nearly full capacity. Sarah stood on the bridge, looking at the star field ahead of them, the same stars that had witnessed the destruction of the Kepler line just a week earlier. "Set course for the Halvorn corridor," she ordered. "Best speed, stealth protocols engaged." The ship moved silently through the dark, its stealth systems masking its engine signature from any watching sensors. Sarah kept the crew on a heightened alert status the entire journey, knowing that a single mistake could reveal their position and end everything before it truly began. Elena continued monitoring communications, and on the fourth day of travel, she confirmed the convoy was on schedule, moving through the corridor exactly as the intercepted transmission had indicated. 3 transport ships, Elena reported, escorted by 2 light cruisers. "They're not expecting any resistance in this sector. Their formation is loose, no combat posture. They think they're safe," Reyes said, "because they think there's nothing left to threaten them." Sarah looked at the tactical display, studying the convoy's projected path through the corridor. There was a narrow asteroid field along their route, remnants of a destroyed moon, that would provide excellent cover for an ambush. "Take us into the asteroid field," she ordered. "We'll let them come to us." The Reckoning slipped into the shadow of the asteroids, powering down all non-essential systems to minimize its sensor signature. Sarah watched the tactical display as the convoy approached, moving at a steady pace through the corridor, completely unaware of the danger waiting for them. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice stayed calm and steady as she gave the order that would mark the beginning of humanity's fight back. "All weapons, stand by," she said. "We only get one shot at surprise. Make it count." The crew of the Reckoning held their positions in silence, watching the convoy grow larger on the view screen, waiting for the moment when the hunter would finally strike back against those who believed they had already won the war. The convoy moved deeper into the asteroid field, unaware that a wounded but determined ship was waiting for them in the shadows of the drifting rocks. Captain Sarah Cade watched the tactical display closely, timing every second. The 2 escort cruisers stayed close to the transports, but their patrol pattern was lazy, exactly what she would expect from an enemy that believed there was nothing left to fear in this part of space. "Range to lead transport, 4,000 kilometers, Reyes reported quietly. Escort cruisers still on standard patrol pattern. "No sign they've detected us." "Target the escort cruisers first," Sarah said. "If we take them out fast, the transports won't have time to call for help." "Weapons locked," said Ensign Park from the tactical station, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. Fire. The Reckoning's rail cannons opened up from the cover of the asteroid field, sending a devastating volley of kinetic rounds across the gap toward the nearest escort cruiser. The Coalition ship never had a chance to raise its shields. The rounds tore through its hull, and within seconds, it broke apart in a silent flash of light, debris scattering into the void. "Second escort is turning to engage," Reyes called out. "Full spread, all weapons," Sarah ordered. The Reckoning fired again, this time targeting the second cruiser, as it tried to bring its weapons to bear. The human ship's advantage of surprise proved decisive. The cruiser managed to get off only a handful of shots, none of which found their mark, before the Reckoning's sustained fire tore through its shields and hull. It exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations as its own munitions ignited. The 3 transport ships, now completely undefended, tried to scatter, but they were slow and heavily loaded, never designed for combat maneuvers. Sarah felt a flicker of hesitation. These ships likely carried civilian crew members, people who had signed on to move cargo, not to fight a war. "Hail the transports," she ordered. "Tell them to power down engines and prepare to be boarded. We're not here to kill anyone who doesn't fight back." Elena worked quickly to translate the message into the Coalition's common trade language and broadcast it across all channels. 2 of the transports immediately powered down, their crews surrendering without resistance. The third tried to run, and Sarah reluctantly ordered a single disabling shot to its engines, careful to avoid any strike that would risk the lives of the crew inside. Within an hour, the battle was over. Sarah led a small boarding team onto the transports herself, wanting to see with her own eyes what they had captured. The cargo holds were filled with refined fuel cells and crates of munitions, exactly as Elena's intelligence had predicted. It was enough material to resupply a significant portion of the Coalition's advancing fleet. The crews of the transports were a mix of species Sarah had never seen up close before, some tall and thin with mottled gray skin, others shorter and covered in fine scales. They stared at her with a mixture of fear and confusion, clearly not expecting to encounter any resistance at all, let alone a human warship operating deep in what they believed was secured territory. "Why did you attack us?" Sarah asked one of the crew members, a scaled alien who seemed to understand basic Coalition trade language. "Humanity never declared war on the Coalition. We never threatened you." The alien looked at her with what seemed like genuine confusion. "We were told the accelerating species posed a future threat to Coalition stability. We were told this was a defensive action, sanctioned by the full Council. I did not know there would be no warning given. I did not know civilians would be targeted." Sarah felt a cold anger settle in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "There was no warning. 40 of our warships were destroyed without any declaration, any demand, any chance to respond. Thousands of people died in the first hour." The alien lowered its head, and Sarah could not tell if the gesture meant shame or simply confusion at a human custom it did not understand. "I did not know the scale of what was ordered. Many of us were not told the full truth of Directive 7. Sarah decided to leave the transport crews with enough supplies to survive until they could be picked up, taking only the fuel and munitions cargo for the Reckoning's own use. She did not want to become the kind of enemy the Coalition had shown itself to be. As she returned to her own ship, she carried with her a growing understanding that the war was not being fought by the will of every individual in the Coalition, but by the decisions of a council that had judged an entire species guilty of a crime it had not yet committed. Over the following weeks, the Reckoning became a ghost in Coalition territory. Sarah's crew struck at supply lines, disabled communication relays, and freed several groups of human colonists who had been captured during the opening days of the invasion and were being held in temporary detention stations along the Coalition's advance route. Each strike was carefully planned, using the element of surprise and the ship's improved stealth systems to hit hard and disappear before any significant Coalition response could be organized. Word of the attacks began to spread. Elena intercepted increasingly frantic Coalition communications, discussing a single human warship that seemed to appear and vanish at will, striking with precision, and then vanishing into the depths of uncharted space. The Coalition military began calling it different names in different reports. Some called it the Phantom. Others, in a rough translation Elena found almost amusing, called it the Unkillable. "They think we might be more than one ship," Elena reported during a briefing 3 weeks after the first ambush. "Their intelligence reports are inconsistent. Some say there could be as many as 5 human vessels operating independently. They don't understand how one ship could be responsible for this much disruption." "Let them keep guessing," Sarah said. "As long as they're confused, they're cautious, and caution slows them down." But the toll on the crew was starting to show. Mei-Lin had grown thin from the endless repair work required after each engagement. Reyes carried a weariness in his eyes that came from making difficult tactical decisions again and again, knowing that every mistake could mean the end of the ship and everyone aboard it. Sarah herself found it harder to sleep each night, her mind replaying the faces of the crew members she had lost during a raid on a Coalition listening post that had gone wrong, costing the lives of 2 engineering technicians when a defensive turret caught them by surprise. It was during a routine patrol near the edge of Coalition space that the Reckoning encountered something unexpected. Elena picked up a distress signal broadcasting on an old frequency, one that predated the Coalition's standard communication protocols. Sarah ordered the ship to investigate cautiously, wary of a trap. What they found was a single small vessel, heavily damaged, drifting near a rocky moon. Its design was unlike anything belonging to the Vandrake Coalition. Sensors identified the ship as belonging to a species called the Threll, a smaller alien civilization that existed on the fringe of Coalition territory, technically independent but heavily influenced by Coalition political pressure. Sarah ordered the ship brought aboard the Reckoning's shuttle bay, and what they found inside changed the course of their fight. The pilot, a Threll named Vesic, was near death from injuries sustained when Coalition patrol ships had attacked his vessel without warning, mistaking it for a smuggler running supplies to resistance movements within Coalition territory. Once stabilized in the ship's medical bay, Vesic shared information that confirmed everything Sarah had suspected and revealed far more than she expected. The Vandrake Coalition was not a united and eager alliance. Several member species, including the Threll, had grown resentful of the Coalition Council's increasingly aggressive policies, first toward smaller independent civilizations, and now toward humanity. The Council fears anyone who grows too quickly, Vesic explained, his translated voice thin and pained through the medical bay's speaker system. They fear losing control of this region of the galaxy. Humanity is only the latest target, but there have been others. My own people have watched our independence eroded year by year, our resources taken under the excuse of coalition security needs. Are there others who feel the way you do? Sarah asked. Others who might be willing to resist the Council's decisions. Vesic was quiet for a long moment. There are some quiet networks of resistance among several coalition member species, but we are small, disorganized, and afraid. The Council's military is vast, and any open resistance has been crushed swiftly in the past. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a realization that the fight against the coalition might not need to be fought by humanity alone. What if that changed? What if there was proof that the Council could be challenged and survive the attempt? Vesic looked at her with something like cautious hope. Then perhaps others would find the courage to stand as well. That conversation marked a turning point for Sarah and her crew. The reckoning was no longer simply fighting a defensive campaign to slow the coalition's advance toward Earth. It was becoming something else entirely. A symbol that the Coalition Council's control was not absolute, that even a single wounded ship could strike back and survive. As word of the human warship's continued survival spread through both coalition and independent channels, quiet whispers of resistance began to grow louder among species who had long felt powerless against the Council's authority. Sarah stood on the bridge one evening, looking out at the stars, thinking about how far they had come since that first desperate flight into the Kestrel cloud. They were still one ship, still vastly outnumbered, still fighting an enemy with resources beyond anything humanity could match. But they were no longer just surviving. They were becoming a rallying point, a proof that resistance was possible. Captain, Reyes said, joining her at the viewport. Elena's intelligence suggests the main coalition fleet has slowed its advance toward Earth. They're diverting resources to hunt for us instead. Sarah allowed herself a small, tired smile. Good. Every ship they send looking for us is a ship not moving toward Earth. Every day they spend confused and cautious is a day Fleet Command gets to prepare. They're going to send everything they have eventually, Reyes said. A whole fleet dedicated just to finding and destroying this ship. I know, Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. And when they do, we'll be ready for them. We're not just running anymore, Tom. We're building something. Whatever comes next, we're not doing this alone. Behind them, on the tactical display, new information continued to flow in from Vesic's resistance contacts, mapping out weaknesses in the Coalition's supply network, and hints of growing unrest among member species, tired of the Council's rule. The lone warship that had survived the destruction of the Kepler line was no longer just a ghost haunting Coalition territory. It was becoming the spark of something much larger, and the Coalition Council, still confident in its overwhelming power, had no idea how much trouble that single ship was about to cause them. 2 months after the destruction of the Kepler line, the Coalition Council made a decision that would change the course of the war. Elena intercepted a high-priority transmission between Coalition command centers, encrypted at a level far beyond anything they had cracked before. It took her nearly 3 days working with Vesic's help to break enough of the code to understand its meaning. But when she finally briefed Captain Sarah Cade and the rest of the senior officers, the news was grim. They're assembling a dedicated hunter fleet, Elena said, projecting a rough translation onto the briefing room's main display. 60 warships, pulled from 3 different Coalition border patrols. Their only mission is to find and destroy this ship. They're calling it Operation Silent End. 60 ships, Mei Lin repeated quietly, against us. There's more, Elena continued. The main Coalition invasion fleet has resumed its advance toward Earth. They've decided they can't afford to keep delaying while chasing us. They believe Earth's remaining defenses are weak enough that the invasion can proceed regardless of what we're doing back here. Sarah felt the weight of that news settle over the room. For 2 months, the Reckoning's raids had bought time, disrupted supply lines, and inspired a growing network of quiet resistance among Coalition member species tired of the Council's aggressive rule. But that time was running out. Earth was now facing the invasion fleet with whatever defenses Fleet Command had managed to scrape together, and Sarah had no way of knowing if it would be enough. How long until the invasion fleet reaches Earth? She asked. Based on their current course and speed, approximately 18 days, Elena said. Reyes leaned forward. And the Hunter fleet? Closer. Our last raid on the Halvorn supply depot may have given away more about our operational range than we realized. Vesik's contacts report the Hunter fleet is already moving into this sector, searching methodically system by system. Sarah sat back in her chair, thinking through the tactical situation. 18 days was not enough time to warn Earth and expect meaningful new defenses to be built. It was, however, enough time to do something else, something that had been forming in the back of her mind for weeks, as she listened to Vesik describe the quiet resistance movements growing among the Threll and several other coalition member species. Vesik, she said, turning to the alien who had become an unofficial but trusted member of the crew since his rescue. You said there were other independent ships, other resistance groups, scattered across coalition territory. How many, realistically, could be gathered if we asked for help? Vesik considered the question carefully. It is difficult to say. Perhaps 20 vessels, mostly lightly armed. Smugglers, private security craft, a handful of retired coalition military ships that defected during past unrest. Nothing that could stand against 60 coalition warships in open battle. I don't need them to win a straight fight, Sarah said. I need a distraction. Something big enough to draw the Hunter fleet's attention away from methodical searching and into a fixed engagement, on ground of our choosing. Reyes frowned. Captain, even with reinforcements, we'd be facing overwhelming odds. If this goes wrong, we lose everything we've built over the last 2 months, and Earth still faces the invasion fleet with no warning at all. If we do nothing, Earth faces that invasion fleet in 18 days regardless, Sarah said. The only real question is whether we spend this time running and hiding, or whether we use every advantage we've built to hit the coalition hard enough that it actually matters. She stood and walked to the star chart displayed on the briefing room wall, studying the layout of nearby systems. Her eyes settled on a cluster of asteroid fields and gas giants near a system called Tellin's Reach, an area with enough natural cover to level the playing field against a numerically superior force. Here, she said, tapping the display. If we can lure the Hunter fleet into Tellin's Reach, the terrain works in our favor. Their larger ships will struggle to maneuver through the debris fields. Vesik's resistance ships can use the cover to strike and retreat, the same tactics we've used for 2 months. And if we can disable or destroy enough of their fleet in one engagement, it sends a message the entire coalition can't ignore. What message? Maylin asked. That they can't win this quietly, Sarah said. That trying to erase humanity, and trying to crush anyone else who resists their counsel, comes at a cost too high to keep paying. We're not just trying to survive anymore. We're trying to force them to reconsider whether this war is worth finishing. The room was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see the doubt on some of her officers' faces, and she understood it. What she was proposing was a gamble with enormous stakes, one that could end everything they had fought for if it failed. But she also saw something else in their eyes, a recognition that they had already come too far, endured too much, and lost too many people to simply keep running. I'll reach out to my contacts, Vesik said finally. It will not be 20 ships joining a war they never asked for, but some, at least, will come. Over the following 12 days, the reckoning became the center of a quiet, dangerous effort to gather every ally willing to fight. Vesik's network delivered on more than Sarah had expected, 19 ships in total, ranging from small fast smugglers to a pair of aging coalition military corvettes whose crews had defected years earlier during a previous period of unrest, disillusioned with the Council's growing aggression. It was not a fleet capable of matching the Hunter force ship for ship, but it was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. Sarah spent those days coordinating tactics with the Allied captains, most of whom had never fought alongside a human before and were uncertain what to expect. She met personally with as many as she could, over secure video links, explaining the plan for Tellin's Reach, listening to their concerns, adjusting the strategy based on the strengths and weaknesses of each Allied vessel. We are not fighting to defeat the coalition today, she told the gathered captains during a final briefing before the engagement. We are fighting to prove it can be done. Every one of you has lived under the fear of Council retaliation for standing up against them. Today, we take that fear away, even if only for one battle. On the 13th day, Elena confirmed that the Hunter fleet had picked up traces of the Reckoning's engine signature near Tellin's Reach, exactly as planned. The coalition commanders, confident in their overwhelming numbers, altered course to pursue, moving their 60 warships into the debris-choked system where Sarah's forces waited in ambush. The battle that followed would later be remembered across the galaxy as the Battle of Talon's Reach, though at the time, it felt to Sarah like nothing more than a desperate fight for survival. The Coalition Hunter Fleet entered the system in a tight, aggressive formation, expecting to corner a single wounded ship. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by 19 Allied vessels using the asteroid fields and gas clouds for cover, striking from unexpected angles before retreating back into the debris. The Reckoning served as the anchor of the battle, drawing the attention of the largest Coalition warships, while the smaller Allied vessels harassed the flanks and rear of the formation. Sarah pushed her ship to its absolute limits, weaving through narrow gaps between asteroids, using the terrain to avoid the Coalition's overwhelming firepower, while her weapons crews targeted engines, shield generators, and weapon batteries, with precise, disciplined fire. The battle raged for nearly 6 hours. Sarah lost 3 Allied ships in the first hour alone, their crews giving everything they had to slow the Coalition advance. Reyes coordinated the shifting battle lines with a calm precision that surprised even Sarah, calling out targeting priorities and adjusting formations as the chaotic engagement unfolded across the debris field. Maylin worked miracles in the engine room, keeping the Reckoning systems functioning despite repeated hits that would have crippled a lesser ship. The turning point came when Sarah noticed the Coalition fleet's command ship, a massive vessel bristling with weapons, had positioned itself slightly ahead of its escort, confident in its shielding, and eager to finally destroy the ship that had humiliated the Coalition for 2 months. Sarah recognized the opportunity immediately. "All Allied ships, converge on the command vessel," she ordered, over the shared tactical channel. "If we take out their command structure, the rest of their fleet loses coordination." It was a desperate, high-risk maneuver, pulling every available ship into a concentrated strike against the most heavily defended vessel in the Coalition fleet. The Reckoning led the charge, absorbing devastating fire from the command ship's escort, while Allied vessels darted in from multiple angles, delivering precise strikes against the flagship's shield generators. Sarah felt the Reckoning shudder violently, as 3 separate weapon impacts tore through its already weakened shields, alarms blaring across the bridge, as damage reports flooded in from every deck. "Shields critical," Park called out. "We can't take another hit like that." "Divert everything to weapons and engines," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We finish this now, or we don't finish it at all." The Reckoning's weapons crews delivered one final, coordinated volley, alongside the last 3 Allied ships, still capable of fighting. The combined firepower finally breached the Coalition command ship's failing shields, and a massive explosion tore through its hull, the resulting shockwave scattering debris across the battlefield, and disabling several nearby Coalition escorts caught in the blast radius. With their command structure destroyed and coordination lost, the remaining Coalition ships fell into confusion. Sarah watched on the tactical display as the once organized Hunter fleet broke into scattered, uncertain groups, some continuing to fight, others beginning to retreat, no longer certain of their orders or their objective. Slowly, methodically, the remaining Allied ships and the battered Reckoning picked off the disorganized stragglers, forcing the survivors of the Coalition fleet into a full retreat. When the battle finally ended, Sarah sat in her command chair, exhausted beyond anything she had felt before, watching the wreckage of dozens of ships drift silently through the debris field of Talon's Reach. They had lost 11 of the 19 Allied vessels, and the Reckoning itself was barely holding together, its hull scarred and breached in a dozen places, its systems running on backup power alone. But the Coalition's Hunter fleet, 60 ships strong just hours earlier, had been shattered, more than 40 of its vessels destroyed or disabled, its command structure eliminated entirely. "Captain," Reyes said quietly, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders across the chaos of battle. "We did it. We actually did it." Sarah looked out at the drifting wreckage, thinking of the 11 Allied ships lost, the crew members aboard the Reckoning, who had given everything to make this victory possible, and the long road that still lay ahead before the invasion fleet reached Earth. It was not a final victory, not yet, but it was proof, undeniable and impossible for the Coalition Council to ignore, that their overwhelming power was not as absolute as they believed. "Get me a channel to every Allied ship still capable of responding," she said quietly. "I want to know who's still with us." "And Elena," Get me everything you can on how the Council is reacting to this, because after today, I don't think they can pretend this war is already won. Far beyond the wreckage of Talon's reach, news of the battle was already spreading through coalition channels, whispered among crews, discussed in hushed tones in command centers across the region. The single human warship that had haunted their supply lines for 2 months had not only survived an entire hunter fleet sent to destroy it, but had shattered that fleet beyond recognition. For the first time since the destruction of the Kepler line, the Coalition Council was forced to consider a possibility they had dismissed as impossible from the very beginning of the war. They might not be able to win this as easily as they had planned. The days following the Battle of Talon's Reach were some of the hardest the crew of the UES Reckoning had faced since the destruction of the Kepler line. The ship limped away from the battlefield with barely functioning life support, its hull held together in places by little more than emergency sealant, and Mei Lin's stubborn refusal to let the ship fall apart. Captain Sarah Cade ordered the Reckoning to a quiet, uncharted system nearly 2 days away, where the crew could begin the slow work of repairs while she tried to figure out what came next. The victory at Talon's Reach had come at a heavy cost. 11 Allied ships lost, along with hundreds of crew members from species Sarah had never even heard of before this war began. Vesic spent hours alone in the ship's small observation lounge in the days after the battle, mourning friends and contacts who had answered his call for help and paid for it with their lives. Sarah found him there one evening, staring out at the unfamiliar stars. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly, without turning to look at her. Sarah sat down beside him. "I don't know if I can answer that for you. I can tell you what it meant for us. For 2 months, we were the only ones fighting back. After Talon's Reach, we're not alone anymore. Word is spreading. Other resistance groups are reaching out to Elena, asking how they can help." Vesic was quiet for a long moment. "My people have lived under Coalition Council rule for 3 generations. We stopped believing resistance was possible a long time ago. What you did, what your ship did, it reminded some of us that despair is a choice, not a certainty." "Then maybe it was worth it," Sarah said. "Not because we won everything, but because we proved something could still change." That change came faster than Sarah expected, though not in the way she imagined. 8 days after the battle, Elena intercepted a coalition-wide broadcast, transmitted openly rather than encrypted, clearly meant to be heard by every ship and station in the region, including the Reckoning itself. It was a message from the Coalition Council, and its tone was nothing like the confident, dismissive attitude that had characterized every previous coalition communication about the war. The Council acknowledged, for the first time publicly, the existence of significant internal resistance among member species. It acknowledged the destruction of the Hunter fleet at Talon's Reach, and it announced the immediate recall of the invasion fleet advancing toward Earth, citing the need to, in their own careful wording, reassess the strategic situation in light of unexpected complications. "They're pulling back," Reyes said, disbelief clear in his voice, as the crew gathered on the bridge to hear the translated broadcast. "The invasion fleet is turning around." Sarah felt a wave of relief, so powerful it nearly buckled her knees, but she forced herself to stay focused. This isn't over. A recall isn't a surrender. They're regrouping, figuring out how to handle a situation they didn't plan for. She was right to be cautious. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena's intelligence work, combined with information flowing in from Vesic's growing network of resistance contacts, painted a picture of a coalition council in genuine crisis. The destruction of the Hunter fleet had emboldened resistance movements across multiple member species, and the recall of the invasion fleet had been forced by growing internal pressure from council members, who worried that continuing the war against humanity, especially after such a public and humiliating defeat, risked destabilizing the entire coalition. It was during this period that Sarah received the message that would change everything. It arrived through one of Vesic's contacts, a formal diplomatic transmission from the Coalition Council itself, addressed not to Earth's government, but directly to the captain of the human warship that had disrupted their plans for months. The message requested a meeting, on neutral ground, to discuss what it called a resolution to hostilities. "They want to negotiate with us," Reyes said, reading the translated message over Sarah's shoulder. "Not with Fleet Command back on Earth. With us. They probably don't fully trust their own intelligence about how much of Earth's fleet actually survived," Elena said. "As far as they know, We might represent the most significant remaining military force humanity has. They're not sure who actually holds power over the human response to this war. Sarah considered the message carefully. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist that any negotiation happen properly, through official channels, with representatives from Earth's actual government. But she also understood the value of the moment in front of her. The Coalition Council was afraid, uncertain, and looking for a way to end a conflict that had already cost them far more than they expected. That fear created leverage, and leverage was something humanity desperately needed if there was ever going to be a fair peace. Reyes, get me a secure channel to Fleet Command, she said. I want Earth's government involved in this, even if I have to relay every word myself. This isn't a decision I'm making alone. It took 3 days of careful communication, working through relay stations and encrypted channels stretched across the distance to Earth, before Sarah finally received authorization from Fleet Command and Earth's Governing Council to represent humanity's interests in a preliminary meeting with the Coalition, with the understanding that any final agreement would require full diplomatic ratification once formal contact could be re-established. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station in an uninhabited system, arranged through Vesek's careful negotiation with contacts who had connections on both sides of the growing divide. Sarah stood on the station's central platform, flanked by Reyes and Elena, facing a delegation of Coalition representatives that included, to her surprise, several species she recognized from the crews of the transport ships captured months earlier, during the raid in the Halvorn corridor. The lead Coalition negotiator, an elder member of the species that held the majority position on the council, spoke first, its translated voice careful and measured. You have caused significant disruption to Coalition stability, Captain Cade. Many among the council believed your species could be removed as a future threat with minimal cost. That assessment has proven incorrect. You attacked us without warning, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady, despite the anger that still lived just beneath the surface. You destroyed 40 ships and killed thousands of people who never had a chance to fight back. That is not something I am prepared to simply move past, because it became inconvenient for you. The negotiator was quiet for a moment. The decision to act was made based on historical patterns observed across many centuries of Coalition governance. Species that grow too quickly have, in the past, become sources of significant regional conflict. The Council believed early action would prevent greater suffering later. I understand now that this reasoning does not diminish the suffering caused by the action itself. Sarah studied the alien carefully, trying to determine how much of that statement was genuine, and how much was simply the language of a defeated power trying to salvage what it could from a failed campaign. What is the Council actually offering? A full cessation of hostilities, the negotiator said. Recognition of humanity's sovereign territory, including all systems currently under human control. A formal apology, offered through appropriate diplomatic channels, for the unprovoked nature of the attack. And, the alien paused, seeming to choose its next words carefully, an invitation for humanity to hold a seat on the Coalition Council itself, as a full and equal member species, rather than an external threat to be managed. The room was silent for a long moment. Sarah had expected demands for territory, perhaps an uneasy truce that could collapse again within a few years. She had not expected an offer of genuine inclusion, a seat at the table that had, until recently, viewed humanity as nothing more than a problem to be quietly erased. Why the change? She asked. 2 months ago, your council believed we could be wiped out with minimal cost. What's different now? The negotiator's translated voice carried something that, if Sarah was reading the tone correctly, might have been genuine respect. You survived when you should not have. You resisted when resistance should have been impossible. And you inspired others across this region to remember that the Council's authority is not absolute. A species capable of causing this much disruption with a single damaged warship is not a species that can be safely ignored or dismissed. The Council has concluded that a hostile humanity, left to grow further in resentment and anger, poses a far greater long-term risk than a humanity brought into the Coalition as a respected member. Sarah thought about everything it had taken to reach this moment. The destruction of the Kepler line, and every life lost in those first desperate hours. The long weeks of hiding and rebuilding in the Kestrel cloud. The dangerous raids across Coalition territory. The trust built slowly with Vesek and the growing network of resistance allies. The devastating losses at Tellin's Reach, 11 Allied ships and their crews, gone, in a single desperate battle that had changed the course of the entire war. "I'll relay your offer to Earth's government," she said finally, "but I want you to understand something first. This peace only holds if it's real. If the Council ever decides again that humanity has grown too fast, too strong, too dangerous, and considers another Directive 7, you will find that we remember exactly how this war started, and exactly what it took to end it." The negotiator inclined its head, in what Sarah had come to understand, was a gesture of acknowledgement among its species. "The Council understands this. I believe, Captain Cade, that they understand it more thoroughly than any lesson delivered through diplomacy alone could have taught them." The formal peace treaty took another 6 weeks to finalize, involving proper diplomatic representatives from Earth traveling to meet with the full Coalition Council, but the framework established in that first meeting held throughout the process. Humanity retained its territory, received formal acknowledgement of the wrongful nature of the attack, and was granted a seat on the Coalition Council, a position that would allow humanity's voice to be heard in future decisions affecting the wider galaxy. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Reckoning months later, the ship finally fully repaired and restored to its original condition, watching as a formal honor escort of Coalition and Allied vessels accompanied her ship on its long journey home to Earth. The crew that had survived the destruction of the Kepler line, the desperate hiding in the Kestrel cloud, and the brutal fighting at Tellen's Reach stood with her, changed by everything they had endured, but alive, and heading home at last. "Captain," Reyes said, standing beside her as Earth grew larger in the viewscreen ahead, blue and green, and impossibly precious after everything they had fought to protect it. "We actually did it. One ship." Sarah looked out at the planet below, thinking of all the names of those who had not survived to see this moment, the crews of the Kepler line, the Allied ships lost at Tellen's Reach, every person whose sacrifice had made this peace possible. "Not one ship," she said quietly. "One ship, and everyone who refused to give up because of it." Behind them, the Coalition escort ships maintained their formation, a silent testament to a war that had ended not in humanity's destruction, but in its recognition as a power the galaxy could no longer afford to underestimate. Below on Earth, news of the Reckoning's return was already spreading, the story of the single warship that had survived the impossible and forced an entire galactic coalition to sue for peace. The war had begun, with an attempt to erase humanity, before it could ever become a threat. It ended with humanity taking its place among the stars, respected, remembered, and never again to be dismissed as anything less than exactly what it had proven itself to be: unstoppable.